Where? Oye. My maternal grandmother's soft, reedy voice reassures me about the tentative start that I'm making. Where? There are things I'd like to ask you about your life tomorrow night. Please be prepared. About my life? What are you going to do with it? Are you writing a book? It's late on Christmas Eve of 2017. I'm lying in my maternal grandmother's bed. Suspicious at first, Mbua eventually agrees to tell me about her life. Sometimes we stumble over language, her deep Shona versus mine, diluted by decades in the diaspora. Sometimes she gets frustrated with my line of questioning. She says, "Zrimwe ajibunzwe." Some things are just not asked. Sometimes it feels cruel, voyeuristic, to continue asking about difficult experiences, to ask her to tell me more about what it was like for her as a young girl to have her family put into a lorry and forcibly removed from their land by the colonial government. Or to ask her to tell me more about what it was like when she found out her 14-year-old son had crossed the border to join Zimbabwe's Second Liberation War. To cry? You couldn't. You just had to keep it to yourself. This was war. Often, as a Black woman writer, I'm asked to talk about the importance of Black women writing, telling their own stories, breaking the silence. Well-meaning as it is, it's a question that speaks to the ways in which our dominant cultures value speech over silence, presence over absence. The trouble with this bias has become clearer to me over the last few years as I've spent time with women of various generations as part of my search for both personal and national accounts of history in the face of great trauma. In the weeks following the conversation with my grandmother, I spoke with various women about the experience of Zimbabwe's Second Liberation War. Some women were unsure of their authority to speak and referred me instead to others. Some women were militant in their refusal to speak because I'd failed to follow the right protocol. Some did speak to me, but there were certain things that they were unwilling to talk about. Throughout these conversations, I thought of my grandmother's words, "Zrimwe hajivunzwe." Some things are just not asked. While the queer feminist poet Audre Lorde rightly taught us that our silences will not protect us, these women's refusal to speak, even when asked, reminded me that silence is often a state that the world forces us into. At a time when younger women of my generation have greater access to platforms and forms for telling our stories, it's often tempting for us to declare, we did not inherit our mother's silences. But how true is this? For one, this ignores the fact that long before us, there were generations of women who did speak out and broke the silence. More than this, it ignores the many silences that today's generations carry. A few months before the conversation with my grandmother, the Me Too movement, founded by African-American activist Tarana Burke, gained mainstream traction through the exposure of decades of sexual harassment and assault claims against Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein in October 2017. 2 weeks later, Lupita Nyong'o came forward with her account, saying, "I felt uncomfortable in my silence, and I wanted to liberate myself from it." Before Nyong'o came forward, a friend and I had noticed that no Black woman had come with their story since the Weinstein allegations were first published. We were struck by the silence. What did it mean? That no Black woman had been abused? We knew from our experiences, his as a queer Black man, mine as a heterosexual Black woman, that that couldn't be it. With the help of the vast amounts of knowledge created by Black women scholars and activists globally, we were able to make some sense of Black women's apparent silence in that Me Too moment. Books like Professor Pumaklola's groundbreaking text, Rape, a South African Nightmare, outline how historical ideas of who can rape and who can be raped are shaped by aspects such as one's race, class, gender, sexual orientation, ability, age, and profession. For example, during South Africa's centuries of colonialism and slavery at the Cape, not a single white or black man was ever tried or charged for raping a black woman. We were deemed unrapeable, dirty, and sexually deviant, whereas white women were held as pure and sexually chaste, in need of particular protection from rapacious black men. It's no surprise then that even as the Me Too movement implored the world to believe women marginalized because we're not white, rich, heterosexual, able-bodied, or of the right professional age, understood that we were less likely to be believed. Indeed, when Nyong'o came forward with her account, Weinstein singled out her claim from dozens of others and issued a statement directly denying it. A few weeks later, he did the same with Mexican-American actress Salma Hayek. Hayek later stated that she believes the difference in response to herself and Nyong'o is because they're not white. More than a year later, a clip from African-American journalist Dream Hampton's Surviving R. Kelly documentary went viral. In it, Chance the Rapper rationalized working with Kelly, saying, "Maybe I didn't care because I didn't value the accuser's stories because they were black women." Later this year, the BBC Sex for Grades documentary, led by Nigerian journalist Kiki Mordi, placed a global spotlight on the decades-long battle against sexual harassment at West African universities. Following this, detractors made a familiar charge used against women who speak out against abuse from within historically oppressed societies. You are being used by our oppressors to bring down our community. Here, the victims were supposedly tarnishing the image of their countries by speaking to the BBC, the broadcasting arm of our former colonizers. If anything, Mordi's documentary highlighted just how important it is to have a local, empowered media space that can override the pressure to remain silent. Importantly, her documentary forces us to ask, who else has been silenced? What other abuses have our authorities helped bury by limiting local press freedoms and infrastructure? And so, as we reflect on this, I'd like to invite us to think about hearing the silence, to understand that what is not said is just as important as what is said. Silences have frequencies. In the aftermath of traumatic pasts and presents, how can we learn to hear the silences that echo loudly, softly, or in code? We can start by paying attention to the shapes that silences can take. There are, for example, silences shaped by language and cultural difference. At the end of 2017, Dr. Cindy van Zyl, a black South African Zimbabwean physician renowned for challenging taboos around HIV and AIDS, shared an anecdote on Twitter about why she mostly refers black patients to black doctors. One of the most important reasons she gave was communication. She relayed a consultation in which she needed to get a sexual history from a black woman significantly older than her. Dr. van Zyl began the conversation in Zulu, a language familiar to her patient. "Mama, are you in a relationship?" "No, my husband died 15 years ago." "Do you have a friend?" "Yes, I do have a friend." "How often do you visit your friend?" "Mostly month end." "Do you use condoms?" "Yes, no, sometimes." "Sometimes." Dr. van Zyl understood. Some things are just not asked. Without crudely questioning, "Mama, are you sexually active?" Dr. van Zyl got the crucial information she needed. Another doctor without her cultural awareness and knowledge of Zulu would have missed Mama's indirect way of speaking and simply moved on to the next question. More than simply transmitting functional information, our languages carry our experiences, our values, and our worldviews. If you cannot understand our languages, you cannot hear us. In particular, we must appreciate that there are coded silences embedded in the languages that marginalized people speak as a means of survival and protection. This can take the form, for example, of languages that queer people may use to communicate with and identify each other in places where there are threats such as social exclusion, prosecution, and even death. More than simply appreciating that they're coded silences, we must understand why they've come to exist in the very first place and actively fight against this. Without this, we're only reinforcing the very silences that we're asking each other to break. Another way to hear the silences is to use our imaginations. In my own attempts to write about the early life of my late paternal grandmother, with precious few records of those years, I've been inspired by the ways in which Black women writers have used their imaginations to overcome great historical silence. South Africa's history, for example, contains great silences where the voices of its enslaved people should have figured. For the most part denied literacy, there was little chance for enslaved people to leave a record for future generations. While many know of South Africa's slave past, or rather, while many know of South Africa's apartheid history, very few know of our slave past. We must then search our collective memory and ask, what stays unheard? To hear those silences, we can use Toni Morrison's notion of re-memory, rehumanizing those who've been disremembered and unaccounted for. Yvette Christiansen's 2006 novel, Unconfessed, offers an example of this. Unconfessed stories the life of historical figure Sila van den Kaap. More than a century before Nelson Mandela's time on Robben Island, Sila was an enslaved woman who served a 14-year sentence on the island for the murder of her 9-year-old son. I could not say as they wanted me to say, says Sila. Throughout the novel, she refuses the confession of guilt and chooses silence as an act of resistance. Christiansen then dedicates her novel to remembering the inner life of an enslaved mother who chooses to save their child from the pain of enslavement by ending their life. Towards the end of the novel, Sila laments, "The daughters and sons of my generations will say, we are not people, we are things. And I will be weeping in my grave, forgotten, hungering after other people's children, for my children will be running behind me, forgotten too, as their children's children, those rocks who were once people, smash and smash some terrible future into shape." In the face of great historical silence, imaginative works like Unconfessed are wreaths laying on the graves of ancestors so that they may not weep, so that they know we, the daughters and sons of their generation, say, we are not things, we are people. For me, it's been Black women writing about women silenced by history that's taught me the delicate art of storing the silence without speaking over it. The generations of women I spent time with as I tried to re-memory the inner life of my late paternal grandmother have helped me understand silence need not represent a dead end, but rather a beginning. After that initial night in my surviving grandmother's bedroom, I decided to put my questions away and just focus on being with her. Before then, I hadn't really spent much time alone with Mbuya. Language was often a barrier. And as I've worked to reclaim my mother tongue, Shona, I've been struck by the fact that the word kunzwa not only means to hear, it also means to feel and to understand. I thought about hearing as feeling and understanding as the silences between my grandmother and I became an opportunity for pause, for deep introspection, deep imagination, and hard work at creating a new language between us, one of feeling and understanding. When I least expected it, perhaps in the middle of tending to her flowers or walking to church, Mbuya revealed things to me I hadn't even thought of asking about. It's only in this space, a space created by a respect for my grandmother's silences, that I was finally able to hear her. Thank you.